Welcome to Halacha in a Year, where we can get to learn all the most relevant halacha through the prism of the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. You are listening to Rabbi Ya'akov Trump. This year is kindly sponsored by the Moshe Group and CA in zechus of Rivka Biela, bas נחמה Shifra, and in honor of Rabbi Trump. We now come to our second section of Siman Nun Beis. It's the 52nd chapter in the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and the topic is Borei Haetz, Borei Haadama, and Shehakol. This is our second part. We discussed yesterday in the previous segment which bracha is for what. We discussed the state of the food in its at the time of consumption. We're going to look at three more concepts today, and that is ancillary parts of the produce, raw fruits and vegetables, and processed fruits and vegetables. Let's jump straight in. So the ancillary parts of the product. So what if we're trying to understand this? What about parts which are edible but not the main part? So let's say the example that is given is the caper bush. So the basic rule is as follows: is that anything which is the primary edible part has the bracha of Borei Haetz or Borei Haadama, but anything which is ancillary, which is second to it, even though it may still be edible, is one bracha down. So if the original was a Haetz, the secondary will get a Haadama. If the original was a Haadama, the secondary would be a Shehakol. So let's look at the caper bush as well. The caper bush is very much a Middle Eastern plant. It's found all the time. It's talked about in Tanakh. So the caper bush has four edible parts. It has the caper berries, that's the main fruit. It has the edible leaves, which are, and then it has the capers, which are actually flower buds, which are used for seasoning, and the fruit husk, which surrounds the caper berry. So in this case, the Kitzur points out the main source of nutrition is the actual fruits, the caper berries, not the capers, which are the flower buds. So therefore, Borei Haetz goes to the caper berries, but the edible leaves, the capers, and the fruit husks are Borei Haadama. Those are one step down from the level up of the berries themselves. Another example, orange rinds which are cooked and spiced are Borei Haadama, one step down from the orange itself. Cucumber skins that are eaten alone are a Shehakol, one step down from the Borei Haadama. And pea pods eaten without the peas are a Shehakol, one step down from the Haadama, unless of course they were grown specifically to be cultivated for the pea pods to be eaten by themselves. What about the pits or the pips in outside of America of fruits? So if they are sweet and edible, they are Borei Haadama, one step down from the Borei Haetz. If they are bitter, they're not considered food and therefore no bracha. However, of course, if you take a inedible seed and you roast it to make it edible, then it does get a Shehakol. What about the husks? So the Kitzur deals with the example of almond husks. So when they are not ripe, then the main edible item is actually the husk itself, and therefore it's a Borei Haetz. But when they are more developed, then the main edible item is the nut, and the husk is a little bitter, and therefore the husk has no bracha whatsoever, unless it's treated or roasted, and then it becomes a Borei Haetz as well. What about sugar-coated nuts? So this is Borei Haetz. Remember, nuts come from a tree, so they're Borei Haetz, and so even if they cover the sugar, and the sugar might even be called the ikar. Let's be honest, why are people having these sugar coated or syrup coated nuts? But nonetheless, it still remains Borei Haetz. What about sugar-covered plants that are usually not eaten? So sometimes you'll have a plant which generally is not eaten by itself, and then it gets sugar-coated. In that case, it's Shehakol, because it's not really considered an edible item outside of it being covered with sugar. Let's move into our next concept. The next concept is raw fruits and vegetables. So what about unripe fruit which is cooked with ingredients to sweeten it? So in this case, it's Shehakol. It's not considered the full fruit yet. This is with the exception of an esrog if eaten and cooked before it was actually ripe. What about unripe fruit which was burnt by the sun and fell from the tree? This is what's called novlos in the language of the Mishnah. That is a Shehakol because it's considered still unripe even though it was scorched and fell off the tree. What about bread which spoiled? So that's considered Shehakol, loses its bracha of hamaitzi. What about cooked dish which starts to spoil? Then it would have a Shehakol as well, same thing. What happens if it's spoiled more? If the whole thing is spoiled, then it's no bracha whatsoever. It's considered inedible and it loses its bracha altogether. What about vinegar, which is bubbly? So if it is bubbly, it is spoiled and it loses all its brachas. What if I diluted it enough to make it drinkable? So in this case, it goes back to a Shehakol. What about a fruit which doesn't ripen on the tree but needs picking and being left out to ripen? So the example is pears. Pears often don't ripen on the tree. They ripen after being plucked from the tree. So since this is the normal way of ripening, then it needs a Borei Haetz, and that's what the Kitzur suggests as well. Finally, the last concept that we're going to look at today is processed fruits and vegetables. What about a fruit which has no edible part, but the sap in the seeds is edible? So if the one is able to extract that sap or juice, that juice is Shehakol. Even if one consumed it with the seed or the husk, with it, that seed and husk are not considered a viable product by themselves. What happens if I process the fruit in such a way that it's not recognizable as a fruit? So for instance, I take a strawberry, I take an apricot, and I crush it into jelly or jam. In that case, the bracha is Shehakol. Some debate this particular topic, but that's how the Kitzur paskans. What happens if I said Haetz on that apricot jam? So in that case, one is Yotzei, but the Kitzur says it's really a Shehakol. What if this is the main way of consuming the fruit? Meaning to say, I can't eat the fruit as it is, but it needs to be squashed, crushed, and with added ingredients. Then in that case, it's still a Haetz. What about rice and millet? So the Kitzur describes two different substances called orez and dochan. And here's the halacha, and then we'll work backwards to reality. If orez and dochan are cooked and not crushed, they're cooked as whole, then the bracha is Borei Haadama. If they are ground into flour and baked, for orez, that type of bread is Borei Mine Mizonos, and for dochan it remains Shehakol. The Kitzur points out that there's a doubt as to what orez and dochan are. Some say that orez is rice and dochan is millet, but some say it's the opposite way around. So therefore he says it's best not to eat these alone because it's a safek bracha, and if one has no choice, one can say Shehakol and be yotzei on them. However, the Mishnah Berurah paskins that in fact orez is rice and dochan is millet, which would mean that for rice, when cooked, it would be Borei Haadama. When it is crushed and made into bread, it would be Borei Mizonos. And for millet, when cooked, it would be Borei Haadama. And when it is ground and made into bread, it would be Shehakol as well. What about bread made from other legumes, like cornbread? So in that case, says the Kitzur, the bracha is Shehakol beforehand and Borei Nefashos afterwards. What is the bracha on sugar? The bracha is Shehakol. What about sugar cane? Generally speaking, people don't eat sugar cane, they suck sugar cane. And because they're sucking the juice out of it, then it's Shehakol. And similarly, if a person sucks licorice or sucks cinnamon to extract the taste, that is Shehakol because one's not actually consuming the actual product itself. With this, we conclude the fascinating brachas of Borei Haetz, Borei Haadama, and Shehakol. Obviously, lots to talk about, but this is at least a guiding framework before we move on to the notion of juices, which will be next. Have a wonderful and meaningful day.